welcome to Confection Kitchen. I will be doing, hopefully, a weekly series on tips and tricks on how to bake. It will range from cookies to cakes to the elusive macaroons and croissants, and they'll range from 20 to 40 minutes depending on the process that I'll be doing that episode. My goal is for you to learn something new and to become better bakers and have fun with baking. Today we're going to be doing a chocolate chip cookie recipe, and this recipe comes from Sally's Baking Addiction Cookbook. And this is a great cookie base, so you can really make any kind of cookie you want out of this. If you want to make like a M&M cookie, then all you have to do is swap out a half a cup of those chocolate chips for M&Ms. So the ingredients today are, it's going to be 2 1/4 cup of flour, and I love King Arthur's flour. It has a higher protein content in the flour, which usually creates for better baking. You're also going to need 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, and 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch. And the reason we use cornstarch is it creates a softer and thicker cookie, which is something that I think is delicious. You will also need a 3/4 cup of unsalted butter, and it will be melted. And the reason that we melt it is it also creates a softer cookie when the butter is melted. And we use unsalted butter so we can control the salt content that goes into the ingredients. If you use salted butter, each brand has a different salt content and it's a little bit harder to control. So if you have just a base of unsalted butter, then you can control that salt a little bit easier. We're also going to need 3/4 cup of light brown sugar and a half a cup of granulated sugar. And the reason for this, we want more light brown sugar than granulated, is again makes a softer cookie, which again I prefer. You will also need 1 large egg and 1 egg yolk, and you want them both to be at room temperature. And room temperature is super important for many recipes because it helps create a more uniform dough. You will also need 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and 1 cup of chocolate chips. Now, I like to use a mixture of milk chocolate and semi-sweet chocolate. I find it to really create a really tasty cookie because not everyone prefers one over the other. And again, if you wanted to make M&M cookies, just swap out a half a cup of that for M&Ms. So what you will need today is you're going to need 2 bowls. So here I have kind of a medium-sized bowl, here I have a medium-sized bowl, and this is what I'm going to be using for my wet ingredients. And then I have a larger bowl that I'm going to be using for my dry ingredients. And the reason is we're going to be pouring our wet into our dry, and that creates, again, a more uniform and easier dough to work with. You're going to need 2 cookie sheets. So one I have with the silicone baking mat, which is what I'll be putting my cookies on. And the other is a smaller one, and I have some parchment paper because I'm going to show you what my little tip is for freezing dough and saving it for later. You're also going to need a whisk and then either a spatula or a wooden spoon, either or, it's up to you. And then optional, you're going to need, if you want to do what I do, you're going to need a scale. And this scale I use is a Greater Good scale. I think I got it on Amazon. It's one of the more inexpensive ones, and I love it. It's just nice and simple, nothing fancy, which I don't need. And then I also have a cookie scoop or a spoon. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put all of our dry ingredients in our large bowl. So here I have the flour, and then the important thing when measuring out flour and really kind of anything, especially in the baking world, is you want to make sure that you really scoop in and have a big heaping thing. And I always like to tap it down with some type of leveler, and then I'm going to level it out so it's even. All right. And then here I have the baking soda, cornstarch, and salt, and I'm going to whisk that together. Okay, so for the melted butter, I like to choose a bowl that is microwave safe so I can put the butter in and melt it before I start. And then that way it has time to cool down and not be so hot before I start entering my ingredients. So I've already melted this butter, and now I'm gonna add in my 2 sugar blends. And then I'm gonna mix this together until I don't see any more lumps of the brown sugar, because you know brown sugar likes to clump up pretty easily. And then once, if I see any clumps, I usually just go in and squeeze it with my fingers just to get those clumps out of the way. Okay, so once it's nice and mixed and all the way in with the butter, I'm now gonna add my egg yolk, okay? And then I'm gonna mix that in just a little bit, and then my egg. Now, you again want these to be room temperature. A little tip on that is if you get a cup of warm water and drop your eggs in there for about 10 minutes, then it will help get it more quickly to be room temperature. So once I mix that in, then I'm gonna add my 2 teaspoons of vanilla, and then I'm gonna mix that in until it's all blended. All right. So now that's nice and blended, I'm then going to pour my wet ingredients into my dry. So I'll take my spatula or wooden spoon, and I'm just gonna go ahead and dump that in. Goodness in there. Okay. And then I'm just gonna mix it together. So if you notice, the flour is blending nicely in with the wet ingredients, which is why we put the wet into the dry. It's a lot easier. I've done it both ways. It still creates a fine cookie, but the process is a lot easier. I do feel a difference when I do blend the wet into the dry with this particular dough. I feel it's a much lighter dough. Then once we get almost all of that stuff in, I'm gonna put the chocolate chips in. And then I'm gonna fold it and kind of press down to make sure that I get all of those chocolate chips in the middle of that dough. And you don't wanna over mix this dough either. So it's really important that you mix that flour just until you don't see any more flour. So that way when you mix with the cookie or with the chocolate chips, you're not gonna be over mixing your dough. So the chocolate chips are throughout. So now, so the kind of an option is you can wrap this in plastic and put it in your refrigerator for up to 2 hours. And you wanna chill this dough before you bake it. So I would say anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours before you actually start your baking process, because this is gonna help keep the cookie from spreading out. So I think almost all the cookies that I usually do, I chill the dough prior. So you do wanna do that with this one. The other option is, I like to make a lot of cookies at the same time, so that way I have some in my freezer on hand. So I usually make pretty big size cookie doughs, and then that way I can just freeze it. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take that sheet that has the parchment on there, and then you're gonna take your scale. And I've cleaned the scale because I'm gonna put the dough right on the scale. So I'm gonna zero it out, and it should be on grams. And I go to grams, and I'm gonna weigh these out, 40 grams. And then I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna roll it and make a dough or a ball out of it. And then what I'm gonna do is, the place that doesn't have very many chocolate chips, I'm gonna place down on here, and I'm gonna create kind of like a dome effect. So this also helps the cookie from overspreading, is if you create a ball, like a little bit of a bigger ball into a dome, then when the cookie bakes, it will slowly spread out, and then that will also create a softer cookie as well. All right, so roll it, find my bottom, and then I'm gonna press down lightly and create that dome effect. So I'm gonna do this until all of my dough is done. All right, so I finished up the cookies. So if you see, they're all in cookies in uniform, so they're all 40 grams. And now I'm gonna stick this in the refrigerator for the minimum 30 minutes, and if I forget, 2 hours. And I'll see you then. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes, and I went ahead and checked on these in the refrigerator. What I'm looking for is that they're cold to the touch and that they're very firm feeling, which these guys are. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these on my silicone mat. All right, so once I do that, I'm gonna then put these in my preheated oven that is at 350 degrees, and I'm gonna put it in for 11 minutes. In the meantime, while those are baking, I have already had some cookies that I made ahead previously, and I usually take these ones and I put them in a Ziploc bag labeled chocolate chip cookies, and these are gonna actually go in my freezer. These can stay frozen. I've had them up to 3 months frozen without any problems. And what I do is when I have, well, one, if somebody wants to buy some for me, I already have them ready to go. And then two, we usually are little late night snackers here. So if we want, like, let's say 1 or 2 cookies for the night, we'll then take these out of the freezer. The awesome thing about this, and I've been doing this for years now, is I cook these straight out of the freezer. You don't need to defrost them. You don't need to like have them sit out. If you just put these on a silicone mat and add 2 minutes to whatever you normally would bake it, they usually come out perfect. So for these, once they're frozen, if I bake them at 350 degrees for about roughly 13 to 15 minutes, depending how soft I want them. So they're really great to do a big batch and save. All right, so my timer went off. So we're gonna pull these out and we're gonna look at these and see how they look. And they're almost done. I'll probably give these guys another, like 1 more minute. They're starting to brown on top, which is great, but I don't want to over bake them because that will lose the softness and the chewiness of the texture. So we'll put it in for 1 more minute. All right, so it's been about 2 minutes, and I went ahead and took these out. And if you notice, they're a little bit more brown on top, and the bottoms are nice and golden brown. I'm gonna leave these on the cookie sheet for 5 minutes to let them finish setting and cooking. And that way when they are done, they're gonna be the perfect cookie. So these ones I had done a little bit earlier. And if you look at it, it's a nice, soft, chewy cookie. So that way, here you go, Talia, when you try it, not good. Such a good, soft cookie. There's nothing better. All right, thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.